Order. I call Kate Green to ask the urgent question. Sir Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Secretary of State make a statement on the impact of coronavirus on children and young people's attendance in education settings?
Mr Speaker, I am grateful to you for granting this urgent question. This government is absolutely focused on returning society back to normal as soon as possible, and that includes in our schools, colleges and right across the education sector. As I have made clear throughout this pandemic, it is my top priority to keep children in school. And indeed, as I speak today, it is the case that millions of children have been back in the classroom since March the 8th, learning with their friends and teachers. I'm sure the House will agree that's exactly where they belong. The vast majority of schools are open. 99.8% of state-funded schools were open on the 24th of June, benefiting children who have given up so much during this pandemic. Back in February, the Prime Minister set out an extensive roadmap, and that we need to continue to be careful now to complete this cautious but irreversible roadmap to freedom. We understand the frustration of parents and pupils who may feel like that they're being asked to isolate unnecessarily. As I have said throughout this pandemic, children are best off in schools. As we continue with our educational recovery, it is vital that absence is minimised as far as possible and that children and young people are attending school. So I'm looking carefully every day at how we manage the balance between safeguarding children's education and reducing the transmission of the virus. Because I know that there are still too many children having their education disrupted, no matter how good remote education is that they're receiving. The new Health Secretary and I have already discussed these matters, and I'm working with him across my department as well as with scientists and public health experts to take the next steps. But as this House is aware, some restrictions remain in place in schools. What I want to see is these restrictions, including bubbles, removed as quickly as possible, along with wider restrictions in society. I do not think it is acceptable that children should face greater restrictions over and above those of wider society, especially since they have given up so much to keep older generations safe over the last 18 months. Further steps will be taken to reduce the number of children who have to self-isolate, including looking at the outcomes of a daily contact testing trial, as we consider a new model for keeping children in schools and colleges. We constantly assess all available data, and we expect to be able to confirm plans to lift restrictions and bubbles as part of Step 4. Once that decision has been made, we'll issue guidance immediately to schools. I would once again like to put on the record this government's sincere thanks to all teachers for their dedication and work at this time. My commitment to the House and to the children of Britain is that we open up wider society. We will stick, as we open it up, wider society up, we will stick to the principle that children's education and freedom comes first.
Kate.
Thank you for granting the urgent question, Mr Speaker. Data published yesterday showed 375,000 children were out of school last week because of coronavirus. It's 9 weeks until the new academic year begins, but we have no idea what the Secretary of State plans to keep them in class. School leaders dread another last-minute announcement. They need time to put plans in place, and their staff also desperately need a break over the summer. The Secretary of State has briefed that the bubbles policy will be replaced with daily testing from September. Will testing take place in schools, and if so, what support will they receive to do it? Can he tell the House the results of the pilots in schools using regular testing instead of bubbles? What impact has this had on the number of coronavirus cases in the school community and the number of hours children and staff remain in class? And can he tell us why, if he believes he has a solution that will keep children safely in the classroom, he's waiting until September? What's he doing now to keep children in school before the summer holidays? Time and again, Labour's called for mitigations to keep children learning, including ventilation and Nightingale classrooms. Why has this not happened? Can he clarify why he abandoned the policy of masks in schools when cases were rising and masks were still required in shops and indoor spaces? Will he share the scientific evidence that led to this decision? Can he confirm that children who have to isolate over the summer and can't attend the holiday activities and food programme will still receive free meals? And finally, Mr Speaker, can he tell us when he expects to receive JCVI advice on vaccinating older children? Does he believe that they will begin receiving the vaccine before September? Mr Speaker, Ministers' negligence in letting the Delta variant into our country is keeping hundreds of thousands of children out of the classroom. The Secretary of State must act now or make way for someone who will.
Secretary of State.
Thank you ever so much, Mr Speaker. So in terms of daily contact testing, this is something that we've been running trials on. Public Health England have been running trials on. We expect for them to report back to the Department for Health and Social Care and ourselves in the coming weeks. But we are very clear that we want to sort of action to be taken, and that is why we very much want to see the lifting of more restrictions and the bubbles within schools as part of the next step. But as the Honourable Lady and yourself, Mr Speaker, will appreciate, that this is a decision that has to be made across government as part of the next stage of our roadmap. But we, of course, be informing schools and keeping them up to date as to that progress in plenty of time before the start of the next term. But let us not forget, Mr Speaker, it's the party opposite. It's the party opposite that deigns to give advice. I mean, their advice was to join the European Union vaccine programme. Well, where would that have got us, Mr Speaker? The party opposite that said it wouldn't be possible for schools to be able to deliver testing right across all our schools and colleges, yet this is what we were able to do. And actually, it's a party opposite that opposed children going back into the classroom and didn't actually support this government's efforts to ensure that children were able to get their education at the earliest possible stage. At every point, the party opposite has done everything that they can to frustrate and stop the opportunities of children being in school.
Select Committee, Robert Hunt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for what he's doing to try and keep schools open. But we have 300,000 children being sent home. In addition, there are 93,500 children who are missing 50% of school or more, as identified by the Centre for Social Justice this week in a hard-hitting report. We are in danger of creating a generation of ghost children denied a proper chance to climb the education ladder of opportunity. So will my right honourable friend update the guidance, look to establish mobile testing units at school as soon as possible, even before September, so as to stop the need for children being sent home? And will he also set out a plan galvanising the forces of the department, local authorities and schools as to how these 100,000 ghost children are going to be returned to school properly so that we can bring their education back to life and we don't damage their life chances for decades to come?
My right honourable friend raises the important issue of those children who aren't attending schools. This is why we pulled together REACT teams, which is a combination of DFE teams, regional school commissioners, local authorities, the police, as well as, crucially, schools themselves, in terms of being able to target those children, working alongside the Supporting Families initiative that is led by MHCLG. My right honourable friend will be aware that actually there is already extensive testing in schools. In fact, there's been over 50 million, I think 57 million tests have already been conducted in schools and colleges across the country. So we already have a very well-established testing mechanism. But the next stage, as we move to step 4 of the roadmap, is we want to see the ability for schools to be able to operate more freely. When it comes to the summer activities, we want all children to be able to be part of that, whether that's for holiday activity and food programmes, whether that is whether that is the additional summer schools that schools are laying on. And that is why, as part of Step 4, we're looking at lifting those restrictions and lifting those bubbles that currently schools have to sort of operate within that guidance of, and we're looking at doing that at the very earliest opportunity, so children will be able to benefit through the summer as a result of that.
Let's go to Barry Sherman. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Secretary of State, will you stop this dither and delay? Now, I don't think that anyone in this House, on education matters, I think we're united, that there is a generation of young children that are missing, have missed education and will continue to miss education. And families, parents particularly, want certainty. They want to know what the rules are and what they can expect so they can plan their everyday lives. And most of all of us who care about education know that the summer holidays coming up could be an opportunity for a vast level of national volunteers working with children to give them that support they're going to be vitally missing because they've missed so much school education. Come on, Secretary of State, take the lead, do something positive, imaginative and bold.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his thoughts. We have already outlined, and if he had listened to the question, I had sort of, in answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Harlow, is that we're very much looking towards lifting the restrictions, especially in terms of bubbles, as part of the next step of the roadmap. As the honourable gentleman will be aware that the government is going to, in the very near future, announce the next step of the roadmap, and it will be very much part of that, and that will be, it's important that all the actions right across government are properly coordinated as part of the process of easing restrictions right across the country.
Let's go to Bob Blackman. Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm delighted that the government prioritised the reopening of schools as we ease the lockdown. And I congratulate my right honourable friend for all the efforts he's made to make sure that children return to schools and get in-person education as much as possible. Now, clearly, as we do so, does he agree with me that rolling out regular testing will ensure that we stop the spread of the virus, but also prevent children from unnecessarily being sent home and missing out on their education, at the same time as making sure that the tests are carried out properly and appropriately?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and he'll probably have seen the figures of over 50 million tests already conducted across schools and colleges. We're very much aware that testing has been an important part of getting schools reopened, and we continue to work with colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care and Track and Trace in order to ensure testing is available, which of course it is available to all pupils and their families as well.
We go to Daisy Cooper. Daisy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of children missing school is rising every single day, and families are at their wits' end whilst the government is once again far too slow to react. So will the government act now and establish a rapid task force with public health directors and school leaders with a mandate to keep schools open safely?
Well, it's fair to say that Liberal Democrats, Mr. Speaker, have never been very good at numbers, and actually schools are open right across the country. They are welcoming children. You've got millions of children in school. You've got millions of children benefiting from being with their teachers, and we continue to take actions to ensure we do everything we can do to maximise the number of children there. And of course, as I touched upon earlier, as part of Step 4, we'll be looking at lifting more restrictions as part of that, but that will be to be announced in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome my right honourable friend's work to keep schools open and his ambition to see the end of the bubble system. But can I ask him to also look at a cohort of children who risk being caught up negatively by COVID guidance and restrictions, and that is children who are due to start primary school this September. I declare an interest that my own son is due to start school this September. in that schools are currently under guidance, unable to run the settling in sessions that are essential to familiarise themselves with their new environment and have the best start at school life. So can I ask my right honourable friend to take action to ensure that those settling in sessions can happen?
I will sort of share some of the guidance we've got, but there is flexibility for schools to be able to do, for those key transition years, to be able to do some level of familiarisation with those children, and I'll organise for my office to share that information with my honourable friend.
Let's go to Tahir Ali. Tahir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have seen the number of children self-isolating quadrupled during this month due to increase in cases of COVID. Due to this sharp rise, more children are now able to learn online from home, with the IT equipment and access to internet provided to schools by the government. Hundreds of families in my constituency of Birmingham Hall Green have benefited from this scheme. I am now hearing that many of these devices have either been disabled or taken back by the schools. This impacts significantly on learning, especially those that are living in poverty. Mr. Speaker, it is important that access to IT equipment is not disrupted. Therefore, will the Secretary of State ensure that the children keep the laptops and only return them when they leave school at year 6 and 11?
So the investment we made in terms of IT equipment is very much there to help pupils. While it is the property of the school, we very much want the schools to prioritise the use of those laptops to actually help children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. And I will certainly take up his point and look at more detail as to whether there's more guidance and more, a stronger steer that we can give to schools to really emphasise that point.
Let's go to Dr. Neil Hudson. Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that the pandemic has caused many young people to miss out on vital learning experiences, and I welcome the government's recovery strategy to help them catch up. In Cumbria, we have unique outdoor education centres such as the Blencathra Centre and the Outward Bound Centres that offer life-affirming educational experiences, both as day and residential activities, offering young people a chance to benefit from some of the vital opportunities they've missed out upon. Does my right honourable friend agree that these centres can be a key part of the solution? And will he look into his department directly supporting and utilising these assets to achieve this educational recovery?
Well, as part of step 3 of the roadmap, we made it absolutely, lifted restrictions so people could do overnight residential. Of course, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the benefits of outdoor education centres and the real value they bring to so many young people. And we certainly continue to work with the sector to how we can promote this, especially as schools got more and more freedoms in the future.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, this government has consistently let down our children. In order to bring down case numbers and to reduce school closures, when the likes of me advocated for teachers to be vaccinated, or for there to be a circuit break during half-term last year, or for other sensible measures, we were ignored. Now, shockingly, given that 1 child in 20 was out of school last week and case numbers are still rising, will the Secretary of State commit to reviewing the use of the bubble system, and will he commit to implement the recommendations now rather than wait until the autumn?
Well, I'll happily pass on a copy of Hansard to the honourable gentleman so he can reference what I'd said earlier on in the UP.
Speaker, I think the Secretary of State's right to push back on the Labour Party. I don't remember them being huge champions of getting schools back on March the 8th when we were campaigning so strongly for it, so their words are a little bit hollow now. Can I just ask the Secretary of State, though, he's clearly, I think, indicating where he wants to go on getting rid of bubbles. I'm not really sure, though, why we can't do it now, because we're going to then cause a huge problem for the rest of term. We're not going to give a lot of time for teachers and schools to prepare for the autumn. But what I really wanted to ask him was about testing. Given that we have now vaccinated all of those adults at risk of being seriously ill from COVID, is he really suggesting, given that COVID is going to be endemic, that for the rest of time we're going to be testing our school children on a regular basis? I think we need to move back to normal. Once we've protected everyone who's vulnerable to COVID, and children are not, largely, we need to get back to normal, not ensuring our children have to be continuously tested for the entirety of their school careers.
My right honourable friend raises a very interesting and thoughtful point, and we do want to see schools return to normality, and we don't want children to feel as if there is an extra layer of things that they have to do that we as adults don't have to do. And I think that is very important. Testing has been an incredibly important tool as part of the armoury to get schools back, especially in March the 8th, where we saw the mass return of schools. But we do keep this under review. We're looking at, we obviously take advice in terms of scientific advice from the Department for Health and Social Care and Public Health England, and of course other scientific bodies. But we are looking at this continuously, but we have found it a useful tool. But actually, much longer term, do I see testing as something that we expect children to continuously do, always in the future? No, I don't. And I ideally want to move away from that at the earliest and most realistic possible stage.
My old friend pointed out there is a risk, as things stand, that children may have to isolate and stay at home when they should be taking part in the holiday activities and food programme over the summer. Can the Secretary of State give an assurance that whatever happens, children who are entitled to access food support over the summer will still be able to do that?
I can absolutely assure the right honourable gentleman that that's the case. We will be looking to ensure that obviously the Department for Work and Pensions has its COVID support fund that is available for local authorities to provide free school meals. Any changes as part of the roadmap that would lead to the lifting of further restrictions and of bubbles within schools would also mean and take effect. So for the summer period, for summer holidays as well. So children who want to take part in holiday activity and food programmes would very much be able to without operating within a bubble system.
Red Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Because of new variants, it's quite possible long into the future that the number of cases of COVID will increase from time to time. But is he aware that Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, who was behind the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, said that if high protection against hospitalisation continues, despite spread in the community, the public health crisis is over? So does my right honourable friend understand that we must move away from being concerned with the number of cases of COVID and disrupting schools needlessly through testing and isolation, and focus squarely on hospitalisation?
I very much do have that at the forefront of my mind, and it'd be very interesting if my right honourable friend has time to actually maybe sit down with him and also some of my team and some from Department for Health and Social Care actually to sort of discuss this in greater detail, because the key thing is to making sure that people aren't being hospitalised and people aren't in danger of dying. And of course the vaccine has had enormous success in doing that, but we cannot then have a break on children's lives in the future.
Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, I commend and thank the Secretary of State for being here today and addressing the concerns of many of us. What happens here sets the direction for regional administrations. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on young people's education, with some not being able to access resources and many suffering from the closure of schools, and mental health of pupils are rising at very alarming levels. So what discussion has the Secretary of State had with school principals and with regional assemblies to reduce the negative impact on our children's academic development? And what steps can the Secretary of State take to ensure that the education system is pandemic ready for the future?
Well, we have always, at all stages, done as much as possible to work with all devolved administrations right across the United Kingdom, and will continue to do, whether that's to do with issues to do with mental health, whether that is to do with awarding of grades, or whether that is to do with education recovery. And if I could just take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, just to put on the record my thanks for work that I had the opportunity to do with Peter Weir, who was the Minister for Education in Northern Ireland, who we had a very close working relationship, and very appreciative of all the work he undertook for the children and students in Northern Ireland in his time as Minister.
Let's go to James Daly. James.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Metropolitan Borough of Bury currently has over 2,000 children self-isolating, negatively impacting their social, emotional and educational development. I welcome and recognise my honourable friend's commitment to keeping children in school, but does my right honourable friend, and I'm sure he does, recognise and agree that we cannot allow this situation to continue? Surely we must learn to live with COVID-19 and remove the requirements for school bubbles, together with the current policy of self-isolation at the earliest opportunity.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're very much wanting to go down that course of easing restrictions and ensuring, as we come out of this pandemic, is that children are one of the greatest beneficiaries. So my honourable friends and my minds are very much in the same place.
Let's go to Siobhan McDonough. Siobhan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Children in the most disadvantaged areas are almost twice as likely to be those self-isolating, like Year 6 at St Mark's Primary in my constituency. But they are also likely to be on the wrong side of the digital divide, with 23 pupils at St Mark's still without the kit and connectivity required to log in and learn from home when isolating. With every click widening the attainment gap, will the Secretary of State today back my campaign to ensure every child entitled to free school meals has access to data and a device at home?
Well, this is, Mr. Speaker, is very much why we invested hundreds of millions of pounds in the rollout of 1.3 million devices to be able to support schools, but most importantly to be able to support children, such as the Honourable Lady set out.
Let's go to Caroline Notes. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend reassure me, as we look to both the 19th of July and the end of the summer term, that there can be no question of a return to bubbles and self-isolation when children return in the autumn?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be preempting the decision of cross-government in terms of the next stage, but our direction is very clear about lifting the restrictions and ensuring that children are not in a situation where they have to bubble, very much part of the course of this roadmap. And of course, we'd be very much expecting that children would not be facing that in September, as my right honourable friend has asked.
Let's go to Caroline Lucas. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State says his priority is to keep children in school, yet hundreds of thousands of them are missing yet more precious time in the classroom, as well as important end-of-term rituals, and families are angry and desperate. But for many months, organisations like the Health and Safety Executive and the Royal Society of Medicine have been saying that to protect our children, one of the basic things that needs to be done is to ensure better ventilation in all classrooms. If you live in New York, for example, you can consult a public website to see the ventilation status of every single classroom in the state, and there is serious investment in ventilation and filtration. Why hasn't the Secretary of State done something similar here, introducing those basic mitigation measures and fast-tracking the assessment of testing pilots? Living with COVID mustn't mean dumping all the risk on our children because the Education Secretary hasn't acted with anything like the urgency and ambition this crisis demands.
As every stage, we've put in all the protective measures that are required in order to be able to keep children safe and make sure that they're back in the classroom and having the opportunity to learn.
Right, let's go. Richard Graham.
The numbers of pupils self-isolating and therefore not at school have risen nationally from 40,000 to 300,000 in 3 weeks. And in the same period in Gloucestershire, from a few hundred to almost 8,000, virtually 8% of all pupils. This is clearly not the direction either the Education Secretary or any of us would like to see happen. And therefore we can all agree with the SAGE's children's expert, Professor Russell Viner, who said that we have to rethink all the rules around our schools, which are not the driver of transmission at the moment. And to my knowledge, there is not a single child in Gloucestershire which is in one of our hospitals with the virus. So something needs to be done, and my right honourable friend has already given a clear steer that he wants to see children back at school as soon as possible and the benefits of summer school enjoyed. So could he consider a pilot project in Gloucestershire to allow all these children who are self-isolated to get back at school as soon as possible?
Well, frankly, Mr. Speaker, if there's going to be a pilot project, it's going to be in Staffordshire, not in Gloucestershire, but it was a good old point.
Right, let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you. Professor Marmot has reported today on the impact of inequality in large parts of Greater Manchester, including my own constituency, and we know COVID has exacerbated these inequalities. We know too many children have had their education disrupted and too many still are. And look, we all agree we need to ensure children and families are supported, not just during self-isolation, but that catch-up is intensified too. So what work is his department doing on the wider impact that COVID may have on this cohort of children in school or college through the pandemic? How do we ensure we properly tackle the inequalities created by COVID on top of the pre-existing inequalities affecting the same children?
I'd very much appreciate it if the honourable gentleman would forward on the report, as it would be very interesting to sort of look at the details on that. And we have been looking very closely at the impact of COVID on children's learning right across the country. And we've been doing a very detailed study with Renaissance Learning to look at the lost learning, not just as a national cohort, but very much at the granular detail. And this is very much informing our policy development as to how we best address that.
Let's go to Stephen Hammond. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his answers today and his commitment to remove self-isolation for school children as soon as possible, which would be widely welcomed across Wimbledon. Can I ask him to say what exactly, and can he reassure me what the government is doing to ensure that disabled children get the support they need at home when they have been self-isolating and unable to attend school?
Well, we very much expect that the education to be delivered for all children remotely, whether they are in a mainstream school, special school or alternative provision. And we work with the sector to ensure that that happens, including the provision of IT equipment and devices, which is so critical for all schools to be able to deliver that.
Mr. Speaker, we remember the appalling handling of the free school meals debacle over Christmas, where this government and football players had to, this opposition and football players had to try and force government to do the right thing. My constituents in Ilford South, amongst some of the poorest in certain super output wards, are concerned, extremely concerned, that their holiday activity and food programme has not been guaranteed if they are going to be at home self-isolating. Would the Secretary of State please be crystal clear that nobody will go without food this summer?
Yeah. Well, the honourable gentleman probably actually heard my answer to his colleague earlier on, and of course the DWP scheme is there to ensure and support children who are in receipt of free school meals over the summer period. The holiday activity and food programme is an extensive scheme across local authorities right across the country. I think this is an excellent scheme, and we want to see all children to be able to take part in it because of the benefits not just of food, but as importantly activity as well that's part of that scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to end bubbles. Last week, some 74%, I think it was, of children who were isolating in England were doing so not because they caught COVID, but because someone in their bubble had done so. This puts a huge strain on them and their parents as well. So with that in mind, between now and terminus date, will my right honourable friend consider accelerating the rapid testing programme to ensure that we're seeing less self-isolating in children?
Well, we always continue to work with Department for Health and Social Care in terms of testing and being able to sort of maximise that out so that actually we're able to catch people with COVID at home so they're not in a position of infecting their friends at school and also their teachers.
Rushan Narali. Rushan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With nearly 400,000 children and young people out of school just last week from COVID-related reasons, the government's failures to secure our borders against the Delta variant has demonstrated the damage it's doing to children and their future. And given those failures and the incompetence, frankly, of the Secretary of State over the last year in getting a grip and supporting school children, isn't it time that he worked with the Chancellor to get the funding that's needed for catch-up, as was recommended by the former catch-up czar, Sir Kevin Collins? There's a shortfall of £13.6 billion. Isn't it time that that money was provided so that children don't continue to suffer because of the mistakes of his government?
Well, the Honourable Lady seems to be blissfully unaware that we've already invested over £3 billion in terms of supporting children to be able to catch up in our schools. We'll continue to work closely, as she requested, with the Treasury, as we have been doing as we approach the spending review, to see what further action is needed in order to be able to support our children.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, 375,000 pupils were off school through self-isolation, and there has been a 40% increase in antidepressants being prescribed to under 17-year-olds. Given that children are extremely unlikely to suffer serious ill health as a result of catching COVID, and given the damage being done to their education and their mental health, isn't it time we stopped this self-isolation madness and get all pupils back in the classroom where they belong?
Well, I think my right honourable friend raises a really important issue in terms of children's mental health, and this is why we've been so concerned to put in interventions in place to be able to support children, as well as those who work in schools and colleges, with their mental health at this incredibly difficult time. And actually the best way of helping children and all people with all staff is with their mental health is actually having schools functioning as normally as possible. And that's why we've always been clear that when we're in a position to be able to remove those restrictions, to be able to make those changes and actually make it easier for schools to operate as normally as possible, we will always take those steps at the earliest possible stage.
Christian Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Stephen sums up the frustrations of parents and pupils when he tells me that his boy is now home again for a third time because somebody has tested positive in his school, even though they make him wear a mask. 10 days isolation, he's tested negative on a PCR test plus 2 tests a week, and asks how he can justify 40,000 people hugging each other at Wembley, but his son can't see his friends. And the effect on pupils was raised by my constituent Joe, who teaches and who has seen the mental health effects that the Secretary of State has just referred to. What additional support will be put in place to support Joe and the pupils he supports in this mental health crisis?
Well, the honourable member is probably aware that both the Department for Health and Social Care and ourselves have outlined packages of support for schools in terms of boosting mental health support, including having training so that there are mental health those who trained to deal with mental health issues in all our schools right across the country. The honourable gentleman is probably also aware of the comments I made earlier about the lifting of restrictions and the removal of bubbles, which is the next steps that we very much want to take as part of the next step of the roadmap. But it has to be done in line with the broader changes and the unlocking of our country that is part of the roadmap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And getting children back into school without having to self-isolate can't come soon enough, as there is no substitute for learning and attainment and keeping children in face-to-face education. But can my right honourable friend confirm that keeping children in an educational setting, whenever it is safe to do so, remains his priority?
My honourable friend's so right. The number one priority in all of this, whether it was the rollout of the mass testing across all schools, whether it was the restrictions and the sort of levels of safety that we had to put into schools has all been designed about getting children into schools for the maximum amount of time to ensure that they're in front of a teacher with their friends and having the very best classroom experience. And as we move out of this crisis, of course, we want to lift as many of those restrictions as possible and actually liberate schools to be able to operate in the best possible way for themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the government's failure to get border controls in place has enabled the Delta variant to take hold in the UK, forcing children out of classrooms and away from their friends?
Well, at every stage, Mr. Speaker, the government has been one of the first ones to act in order to be able to keep this country safe. It was one of the first countries in Europe to impose travel restrictions on India as a result of the Delta variant, and I know that the new Secretary of State for Health and Social Care and the Transport Secretary, as well as the Prime Minister, take that responsibility incredibly seriously.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's comments today? I have recently just finished a 10-day period of self-isolation following someone in my office testing positive for COVID. However, the flatmate of the person was able to go about their daily lives in a normal way using the government's daily testing trial. Surely, as we learn to live with COVID, it is time to move quickly to a more nuanced approach that does not endlessly interrupt children's education, as it cannot be right to have learning continuously disrupted by unnecessary self-isolation.
Well, there's nothing I can really disagree with my honourable friend, so I best just go and sit down, hadn't I, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Too many school children across my constituency of Blaydon are faced disadvantage from being out of school under the current arrangements. Will the Secretary of State be absolutely clear with school leaders well in advance of any new arrangements to be put in place? It's vitally important that they have that information. And can the Secretary of State also talk about the support that can be given to disabled children to ensure that they have the opportunity to catch up on the education opportunities they've missed?
Well, I would very much like to reassure the Honourable Lady, the member for Blaydon, that we will give all schools good notice, and as I committed to when we said about the next step, step 4, we'll be aiming to issue guidance and advice to schools in conjunction with the details of step 4. In terms of those children, disabled children and children with special educational needs, we've continued to have a real strong emphasis in terms of actually how we support, whether it's special schools, alternative provision, actually weighting the level of support at a much higher level for those schools over those the support available to mainstream schools.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Like others, I'd also like to see the daily testing that's been so successful in the pilot schools immediately returning, so that pupils can remain in school. And I agree with others that we should go back to normal as soon as possible, preferably in September. Yesterday, the Schools Minister stated that we're consulting parents, teachers and pupils about extending the school day. Can the Secretary of State make it clear during the consultation that the extended day should be for enrichment activities as well as time for extra tutoring where necessary?
I very much want to see children spending as much time in school as possible. I mean, I do want them to be able to have the opportunity to go home, Mr. Speaker, at certain points, but as part of that extra time, I do, of course, want them not only to be learning for a rigorous curriculum that has been carefully crafted by my right honourable friend, the member for Bognor Regis, but actually, and they will get a lot of fun out of learning from that rigorous and detailed curriculum, but also I want them to have more fun in terms of doing sporting activities, cultural activities, arts, and so much more as well.
Mr. Speaker, over the past few weeks I've been touring secondary schools in my constituency. And the current self-isolation policy, which incidentally resulted in a Twickenham secondary having to close its doors entirely last week for several days, that combined with lockdowns is not just impacting academic progress, but the number one issue being presented to me by heads and safeguarding leads is the mental health impact. So as well as ensuring support for academic catch-up, could I urge him to do everything he can to speed up the rollout of mental health support teams in schools, but also please will he speak with the Health Secretary to provide urgent additional capacity for Tier 4 CAMHS beds, because too many children are being turned away. And it is not an exaggeration that the evidence I'm being presented with is that children's lives are at risk because teachers and school counsellors just don't have the skills to deal with those cases.
I think, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises a very thoughtful, important issue. I'm very much with her as to I want to see the rollout of the mental health support in schools as quick as is feasibly possible to do so. And I think that also plays an incredibly important role in actually tackling some of the further pressure that's then put at the door of CAMHS services. But I'll be very happy to take up the point that she raised with the Department for Health and Social Care, who runs CAMHS, and as to how best we're able to support children in those early stages, but if there is the need for clinical intervention, how that can be best supported and swiftly supported in order to be able to deal with the problems early on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government prioritised reopening schools above almost anything else, and schools in Stoke-on-Trent have been doing an absolutely amazing job to keep education going, given the challenges faced. And I know schools in my constituency are struggling with several COVID cases right now. It's absolutely vital we keep children in school as far as possible, especially from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. So will my right honourable friend do everything possible to ensure no more time is lost, ensuring all our young people receive the good quality education we want to see?
Well, I know my honourable friend's done so much for education in Stoke, including his efforts to secure a new free school for the Stoke-on-Trent South constituency, and he's right. We constantly review what needs to be done to keep children in school for the maximum amount of time so they can benefit from the education. We recognise that that delivers the best benefits for children, not only in his constituency, but in all of our constituencies.
Let's go to Charlotte Nettles. Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Teachers and school staff in Warrington North have moved heaven and earth over the last 18 months to try to support the education and welfare of our town's young people in the face of last-minute, changing and often contradictory guidance. Nowhere is this more the case than in SEND educational settings, especially as testing can be traumatic or indeed impossible for some children with special needs. When will schools know what is to happen in September? And can the Secretary of State confirm that this will be shared with schools well in advance of the summer holiday to ensure staff are not required to work across their summer leave, and that specific guidance will be provided for SEND schools rather than them being an afterthought?
Well, specific guidance is always provided specifically for special educational needs schools, and I can ensure that the detail of the gov.uk website is available to the Honourable Lady, so she might be able to read it if she is interested to do so. And, Mr. Speaker, I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady, as I said earlier on in answer to other questions, that we will provide that information at the earliest possible stage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by parents across Burnley and Padiham, some who have children off school for the third time, despite having never had coronavirus themselves. So can I welcome the Secretary of State's work to end isolation for students? But one of the things that will really help schools is getting that testing solution right. So can I ask what conversations he's had with Public Health England and the Department for Health on new types of testing, like saliva testing, which will be far quicker and easier for schools to implement?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we always work with our colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care as well as colleagues in Public Health England. It's the very best forms of testing. We're always aware that there's new technology and new innovation there, and we want to be able to use that to the best of ability, not only to make sure that all of his constituents in Burnley who are wanting to attend school are able to do so, but across the country as well.
We now go to Jeff Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've had lots of emails from desperate parents in South Manchester whose children have suffered multiple periods of isolation, are worried about more, and they all say we need to review the isolation rules urgently. We now hear that he's looking at plans to announce as part of Step 4, but there's no reason to wait for Step 4. Schools have got a problem now and they need to know what to do about it. Every time I've met head teachers in the last year, the biggest complaint is always the lateness of guidance from his department. Why is it that the education department is always so slow with advice? And why is it that pupils and schools always seem to be the afterthought in this crisis?
I can assure you, Madam Deputy Speaker, we always do everything we can to ensure that all guidance is available to schools at the very earliest opportunity.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend will be aware, in Keighley and Ilkley we have been subject to restrictions since the pandemic began, whether that was through the local or the regional approach. There is a concern amongst some of my constituents that a regional approach to the implementation of restrictions may return at some point. So can my right honourable friend confirm that if that was the case, which I do not want to see, we wouldn't end up with a situation where schools in Keighley and Ilkley were forced to close, where others in the country may be able to be open?
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I assure you, my honourable friend, the member for Keighley and Ilkley, I want schools in Keighley and Ilkley always to be open and never to be closed. That is certainly something that we want to ensure happens. We do not want to see schools in different parts of the country having to close. That's why we'll take all measures that are required in order to ensure that they stay open.
Madam Deputy Speaker, schools won't stay open because the Secretary of State wills it. We need a long-term plan here. The Secretary of State for Health told the House on Monday that we're going to have to live with the virus. Now, what does that mean for schools? Where's the plan for improved ventilation, for Nightingale classrooms, so that children can socially distance within schools and not have to be sent home in bubbles? The virus is not going away. Where's the plan?
Well, the honourable gentleman seems to have paid very little heed to actually some of the measures that we put in place in order to be able to ensure that children are able to get back into school. And if it's probably not unsurprising, considering his party's policy seems to be very rarely to be encouraging and making sure that schools are open. So the honourable gentleman had the opportunity to ask his question. So. And so we'll continue to do everything we can do to ensure children are able to benefit from a great education. That's what we've been doing. We've been seeing schools open right up and down the country, 99.8% of schools open, and we'll continue to take the measures that are required to keep schools open.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, parents, pupils and, of course, teachers have borne the brunt of difficulties about bubbles and self-isolation of children, but it now feels that the whole country is agog for progress on these issues. Has he heard today, as I have heard, that the party opposite actually now would support him if he felt able to go where it feels that his spirit wishes to lead him, and that is to make progress on ending self-isolation and bubbles? Can he count now on their support?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would probably count them as a rather unreliable ally, but I would certainly, I certainly hope that they wouldn't sort of do the usual sort of Keir Starmer flip-flop. That is, the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition's flip-flop that we've become accustomed to.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has again been found sleeping at the wheel. 1 in 20 pupils were self-isolating last week, and today my office was told of another Coventry school forced to close. Teachers are doing the best they can, but with mitigation rules relaxed and without additional resources, the Delta variant will continue to rip through schools. So why were masks required in class in April but not now, when case rates were lower in April than they are right now? And will the Minister abandon his feeble catch-up plan? Those are not my words, Madam Deputy Speaker, but the words of the Minister's former advisor. And can he put in the resources needed to mitigate COVID and for education catch-up? That's £15 billion, like his advisor recommended.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not really quite sure if the Honourable Lady is arguing for more restrictions or less restrictions. It didn't seem to be that coherent. So maybe if she had able to write to me and actually clarify her position as to whether she's pro-restrictions or against them, I'd be happy to answer her.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Madam
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his update and the promise of ending bubbles and school isolation. Does he agree with me that it is surprising to hear the Labour Party's latest change in position on pupils attending schools, especially when it was only earlier this month that they advocated moving away from formal learning rather than catching up on crucial lost lessons?
I suppose one of the great advantages of opposition is consistency is not something that they have to adhere to. There has been an element of inconsistency there. But what we are focused on as we come out of this pandemic is to ensure we do everything that is possible to support schools, teachers and, most importantly, children in catching up on what they've missed over the last year and a half.
I thank the Secretary of State for the statement. A point of order, Kate Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, in a point of order, I queried the apparent discrepancy between the Secretary of State's insistence to the House on the 21st of June that 6 million children will benefit from tutoring and information given by his officials to Schools Week that the Government had pledged to provide 6 million courses. In the estimates debate yesterday, the School Standards Minister again referred to a figure of 6 million courses. We now have two ministers saying two different things, yet despite Mr Deputy Speaker's response to me on Monday, no ministerial correction has so far been issued. Can you assist me, Madam Deputy Speaker, in inviting the Secretary of State to clarify the matter?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for giving me notice of her point of order. It is, of course, essential that ministerial statements to this House are accurate, but as she knows, the content of a speech is a matter for the member or minister themselves. Don't know whether there's any point that wishes to be made, but the Secretary of State is here, as are his ministers, and will have heard the Honourable Lady's point of order, and I'm sure that she will find some clarity forthcoming. Thank you. A point of order, Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Ahead of my Westminster Hall debate this afternoon, Madam Deputy Speaker, regarding my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal, it has come to my attention that members of this House have been sent briefings originating from the Indian High Commission here in London. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is something diplomatic delegations, as you will be aware, are entitled to do. But in this instance, it would seem that they have included details that would seek to prejudge what is a live criminal case in that country. I'm sure you will agree a most unusual state of affairs when one considers the separation of the judiciary from other branches of government, which is seen as a cornerstone of a well-functioning liberal democracy and a position which flies in the face of the fundamental truth of being innocent until proven guilty. Madam Deputy Speaker, during the 3.5 years of his imprisonment, I have sought myself to not prejudge the case against my constituent, as it is, as you would appreciate, a matter for the Indian courts. I have only asked for transparency, due process and the rule of law be abided by, something that in this instance it would have been seen is being denied to Jagtar, and another indication of the growing calls for the UK Government to define his detention as an arbitrary one, which should now be listened to. Madam Deputy Speaker, could you advise myself and the House what recourse is open to members of this place to ensure that diplomatic missions to the Court of St James with regards to their ongoing business with this House?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for his courtesy in giving notice of his point of order. I do not think it appropriate that members of this House should be lobbied in this way, nor that judicial processes should be interfered with. And I do thank him for putting his concerns on the record and for giving me the opportunity to express our concerns as well. Thank you. I'm now going to suspend the House for 3 minutes to make arrangements for the next business.